Hello there, I'm Dermot Murnaghan and I'm here to welcome you to the Legends of News end-of-year selection box, so to speak. What an inaugural year it's been. It's been our first year. We've heard from dozens of presenters and journalists about their simply remarkable careers and experiences. They've mesmerised us with hosts of amazing tales. Some of them left us simply gasping in amazement, others laughing out loud. So, in case you missed some of them or simply wanted to hear them again, we've rounded up some of the best bits from our legends for you. These are just a small selection of my favourite moments from some of the guests who joined me in 2025. And if you want to see their interviews in full and many others who we didn't have space for today, they're all there wherever you get your podcasts. So, my very first guest on episode 1 almost defines the word legend. John Sargent, has reported from all over the world, from at least, I think, 25 countries going back as far as the Vietnam War. He was the BBC's chief political correspondent for over a decade and then became ITV's political editor before turning his hand to documentaries and popular television. You know what I'm talking about, with best-selling books and that unforgettable stint on Strictly Come Dancing. That's what I'm talking about. His voice remains as distinctive and entertaining as ever. Well, in March 1987, in her second term in office, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher visited the Soviet Union for an official visit, the first Prime Minister to make the trip since Harold Wilson's visit to meet Leonid Brezhnev in 1975. So Thatcher's trip to Moscow was a big story, and John Sargent was there with her on that historic flight there.
She was on her way to Moscow for the first time to see Gorbachev. And everyone was very excited in the build-up to this. We were all mugging it up and thinking, God, this is going to be a great meeting. But when we got to Heathrow, I have to say, reporters are like this, we were so pleased it was an RAF plane, which meant the food was going to be better, and there'd be fantastic wine, and there wouldn't be any of this plastic, knives and forks, with proper linen and knives and forks and crockery. So anyway, the plane took off. We were a group of journalists with her, and Bernard Ingham, her press secretary, came down and said, you can have your meal because she's not come down to see you for a while. So a fantastic meal, around 3 glasses of wine, vintage wines, and a whole thing absolutely wonderful in front of me. And suddenly Margaret Thatcher appeared at my side. So being the gent that I am, I'm stood up and all this crockery and food went onto the floor. So, I just thought, oh, God, I didn't mean this to happen. And she then, this is what I was saying about her playful side, she said, you stay where you are, I'll sort this out. Meaning, you are an idiot male, and she loved playing this. She's the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Did it with the cabinet, didn't she?
And she just sort of, and there's me sort of red in the face and a young man, and, quite a bit younger than her, but she could all right, flirt.
Yeah.
That was what she did. She liked men, and she wants to sort of play with them.
Mm.
And so the real staff rushed forward, collected all this stuff up. And she then just did that on my nose.
Oh.
And because they're all radio, right? So I then whipped out a microphone. We went straight into an interview, 15 minutes on why are you going, what are you doing, what about this, Gorbachev, and all the rest of it. But now, why was that important? Because this was in 1987. Right now, 3 years later, she was in Paris up against it because there was a MP's ballot for her leadership. And she was in deep, deep trouble because Geoffrey Howe had attacked her, and many of them thought she'd lose the next election. So this is 1990. I'm standing outside, and the result comes through, and Heseltine gets 152 votes. She gets 204 votes, but not enough for her to avoid a second round. So I've got all these charts. Thank God, she's had it now. And I thought, has she had it? Well, I don't know. But it's obviously very serious. So I had no idea she had resigned 2 days later as a result. But I looked at her, I thought, well, if I was her, I wouldn't come out. I wouldn't give an interview now. So I said to one of the people from Number 10, is she going to come out? No, she won't come out. she'll consult with colleagues. Yeah. So the moment the camera came to me, all this was in seconds before, Peter Sissons was a newsreader and said, well, John, what's the position? I said, she's not coming out. It's this, consulting with colleagues and all the rest of it. And then, it's a great moment, Peter Sissons then shouted, and I saw it on the recording, John, she's behind you.
It's like pantomime.
And it's pantomime. So out comes Margaret Thatcher. But my earpiece was not working very well. So I didn't hear that. And so I'm sort of... and then somebody jumped up in front of me. I thought, what's all that about? What's happening? And so I then thought, I just want to look... I'll have to look behind. And you think age passes. In fact, it's just a very short gap. I then turn and she's running. She's literally almost running towards me. Bernard Ingham sees her coming towards me and my microphone and starts pushing me aside. And someone else then pushes me aside. So you get this extraordinary, and I said at the time, you don't expect to have a sort of battle with members of the Number 10 staff.
Live on air.
Live on air. And of course, they're trying to get her past me so she talks to all the journalists who are lined up behind the crash barriers. So now why does she stop? Why doesn't she just do what Bernard wants her to do and go and talk to the microphone we've been set up to? Why? Because, of course, she knew me from the incident on the plane and all the rest of it. She knew exactly who I was, and she thought if I talked to him, I can unload my feelings. I don't have to have all this stuff.
And this was We Fight On, We Fight.
And this is, I intend to go on or something and go into the second round, and I want to thank everyone who voted for me and all that sort of stuff. And she then swept out. But, of course, it was fantastic. So I was embarrassed. I said she was going to go out. She did come out. But I quickly realised, hold on a moment, this is a great moment in my life.
Well, that's right in the core of this podcast. That legendary moment, award-winning. Of course, I know you don't do it for that, but you know.
Yeah. So, but isn't it extraordinary? So the whole sequence. So I'm telling you the whole story partly because it's a good story and the food and all the rest of it, but because again, it's this question of she knows. This is you're there, and all you've got to do, all I had to do, is to be calm.
John Sargent, and listen to the whole interview if you want, because there's plenty more where that came from. Well, Natasha Kaplinsky OBE started her media career in the typing pool, then went on to become one of Britain's most recognisable broadcasters. In our long conversation, we talked about her early work with the then unknown Sacha Baron Cohen, no less. Why she was so reluctant to join Strictly Come Dancing in its very first series, plus the emotional cost of media intrusion. Now, Natasha told me about her journey to the BBC breakfast sofa via Meridian Television with Fred Dinage, followed by a stint on London Tonight alongside Alistair Stewart, before an unexpected email brought us two together.
I remember getting an email from Roger Mosey, the absolute legend of news, Roger Mosey, and he said to me, I just need to get my ducks in a row, but would you be interested in BBC Breakfast? And that obviously was just dreamy. And little did I know that one of the ducks that he was getting in a row was you.
Well, surely, no, hold on. Surely you said, well, who would my co-presenter be?
Well, of course.
Said, this is the clincher. No. Yeah.
But I don't know if you know, Dermot, but years before, I had a friend who'd gone to the RTS, and I was so in awe of you that I had actually asked him to get me your autograph.
Oh, no.
So
what did I say?
So for me,
tell her to go away.
On the sofa next to you was just a dream come true. I was just absolutely thrilled to bits to be poached from Sky and to be sitting next to you. And I promise you, I don't know how you feel. Well, you're going to have to tell me this now, but
who's interviewing who?
One of the, exactly. That's part of the problem. That was, I think, one of the best jobs I've ever had, was sitting on that sofa next to you. I loved it.
Back at you. I mean, we'll talk in some detail about that in a moment or two. But one point I want to say, I mean, you're very young then. You're breaking into news and, you're streaking through the firmament. But then, and a little bit now, you always seem to be paired with older men. I mean, I am older than you, but perhaps a little less so than some of the others. And let's not name specific names. But did you find from the executives, perhaps from some of your co-anchors, that, there was even unconsciously a hierarchy, that you were the junior partner?
That's really interesting. I've never really thought about it like that, but you're absolutely right. Apart from Sacha, who was roughly equivalent to me, a few years older, I've always been paired with slightly old man. And I don't know, I think it's just about chemistry. I'm sure you feel the same, that some relationships really work on screen and some really don't. And for me, yes, you're right. It's always been an older man. Never noticed that before. Do I feel like there's been a hierarchy? On occasions, absolutely. There have been a few presenters, on-screen husbands that I haven't, even if there's been an age difference, I haven't felt like there's been a hierarchy. But definitely there have been relationships where I've been told there's a hierarchy. And
you were told that explicitly.
Well, I was. And do you know what? I was fairly green in those days, and I was also extremely respectful of my co-presenters for reason that they were much more experienced than I was. It wasn't because it was a man, but I would have had respect for that co-presenter, whether it had been a man or a woman, if they'd been in the industry longer than I had, and it just so happened that they had.
But didn't you, on occasion, didn't you find you talked about, that it was fed back to you that there is a hierarchy?
Definitely.
Was it actually formalised at any point?
There was one particular contract that I had to sign, and again, with no names, where I had to sign a contract. And can you imagine if this happened these days, where I was always going to speak second, and that my male co-presenter always had to have the first bong, the first headline, and the top bit of the story, even if the story was, divided up. And that was a contract that, I was very, at that point, I felt very lucky to have that job. I wasn't going to be pushing back. But these days, if that happened, could you imagine? It just would absolutely not be acceptable.
Well, it's not that very long ago, though, is it? It's just
how
amazing
things
how quickly
have changed.
Perceptions change.
Yeah.
So, okay, we get to breakfast in 2002.
Is that when it was?
As I remember, yes, quite a long time ago. And I find myself sitting beside you on the sofa. It was just a mad time. Crazy early as well in terms of getting up. And I always admired, I got to say this to you, your attention, your research, because I must say, the hours killed me. I would be like a little less than diligent in reading.
Let me reflect on that, if you don't mind.
You get these briefs, don't you? Background on your guests and what's coming up, and of course read the papers. After a few months, I just thought, look, it's hard enough waking up and pouring some coffee down my throat. I'll just sit on the sofa and see what Natasha says, and I'll follow her.
Out the bag. I worked so hard in those days, and I have to say, with all the different roles I've had since, that was the most stimulating job I've ever had, because it had everything. We were setting the news agenda. There was, politicians to pop stars that sat next to us. It was based in London in those days, so the Prime Minister would pop in or whatever. We had the most amazing guests and a huge team to support us. And I would always get the briefs the night before, and I remember you would just literally rock up at the last minute, and it was just like, you didn't even have to put any makeup on. You just like walked out of amazing Louis, our gorgeous driver, Louis's car, and Louis would have already dropped me like 2 hours before, and I would be diligently writing out all my questions, and you just like stroll in and just sit down and just start like you hadn't even woken up.
Whoa, really happy memories of my time on BBC Breakfast with Natasha. Now, when it comes to the giants of British television news, they don't come any bigger than Sir Trevor McDonald. Sir Trev. For an entire generation, his voice became part of national life, and the reason, I guess, why Britain tuned in nightly at 10 o'clock. For many, Trevor was, and still is, the news. From his early days in Trinidad to fronting news at 10, he recalled the clashes and confidences that have shaped a lifetime in journalism. Arguing with Margaret Thatcher about Nelson Mandela, walking silently through Saddam Hussein's palace, and travelling to Washington to meet the President of the United States.
I was on the back of Air Force One during Reagan's time, as he was doing a campaign, visits to parts of America. It was fascinating. I never got anywhere close to the front, so I don't know what the front of Air Force One looks like. But I was at the back of Air Force, and I was terribly. I thought, wow, I'm at the back of Air Force. I must call my mother and tell her this. and that was great. And then I saw Bill Clinton, who was always much too busy to do interviews and was always a bit late. But then when you saw him and did the interview, he wouldn't leave. And so my chat, which was supposed to be about half an hour, in fact, the conversation went on for about an hour because he kept on. And I had a wonderful time interviewing President Bush the Younger. I went there to do a story about what they were going to do, what the Americans and the Allies were going to do after the Saddam invasion. It was quite clear that they hadn't quite worked out what to do, and certainly the president didn't. So although I was supposed to get a half hour's interview, after 10 minutes or so he stopped and he said, I don't want to go on with this very much anymore. He said, you're one of these clever reporters who are trying to trip me up. And I said to him, Mr. President, you and my mother are the only people who have ever thought I was clever. But then he said, I'm going to take you on a tour of the West Wing and the Oval Office. And I must confess that at that point, I didn't see the benefit of this. Until later on, I thought, wow, I was being shown around the West Wing by a sitting president of the United States, and I was taken into the Oval Office. And we talked about who he saw in the Oval Office and what he did and who he liked and who he didn't like. And one of the funniest things I remember is he kept referring to me as Sir Trevor, Sir Trevor. And I said to him, Americans do this to remember your name. And I said, Mr. President, my name is Trevor. And even in my country, I said, these titles don't mean anything. And I know many people who have them who certainly don't deserve them. And he said, you mustn't say that. My father has one.
Of course. One of the great things, I watched that interview and all your interviews, all your top line interviews certainly is that technique. I like the way George was saying to, well, you're trying to trick me. You have that great technique of listening to the answer. Imagine that. And you just let the guy be hoist with his own petard because you ask the question to which he doesn't have an answer. You don't have to dive in with 2 feet, do you?
Well, you're very kind, but interviews are the heart and basis of what we do. We learn things, and there could be, a taxi driver in the Middle East or something. You get in and you ask a question and he gives you an idea of what life is. Interviews are the basis of what we do. We are lucky to get information from people to use in our reports. And so I've always thought it's very nice to hear you say that because I've given interviews the greatest thought of anything I've ever done. It's the basis of what we do. We learn from other people. We ask questions. We get answers which frame our views about what's going on in the world.
Sir Trev on the fine art and importance of interviewing and holding decision makers to account. Well, it's easy to forget just how big breakfast television was back in the 1980s when it started in Britain. Agenda-setting shows that set the tone for the day ahead. Nick Owen MBE has spent 50 years in journalism and broadcasting, including the heyday of TVAM, who can forget it, alongside Anne Diamond. Well, as well as a shared history of breakfast television, Nick and I are also members of a club that nobody wants to be a member of. I asked Nick about his prostate cancer diagnosis and how he's doing.
Well as can be expected, thank you very much. The worry about it always hovers over you like a dark cloud. But, I was diagnosed about 2 years ago now, worst day of my life, and ultimately had the full radical prostatectomy, in other words, everything taken away. It wasn't a load of fun, but, once I got through that it was the beginning of the summer. I had to miss my favourite football team playing in a playoff final at Wembley to get to the Premier League.
Well, I know your favourite football team, and in that case, it's probably just the way you didn't see it. Luton Town.
Yeah, but that particular day I missed was when they got to the Premier League.
Of course they did, yeah.
So,
for one short season.
Yes, 10 members of my family were there saying it was the best day of their lives, and I just had to watch it on telly. But that's totally separate. But so I had the operation, and by the end of the year, I was sort of up and running again. But it was a very testing few months, I can tell you.
Fair play to you. Now, but you you made it public. You're in the public eye, of course, and have been for many decades. You made it public. Why so?
Well, I mean, because I'm not naturally someone who wants to go out and say what's happening to me personally in my health. However,
well, that's the way we're trained, isn't it?
It's all about the guest, the interviewee, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm
not the story. Yeah. I present Midlands Today, BBC regional television show, and have done for a few years now. And obviously I disappeared from the screens for a while. And lots of people are writing in, so what's happened to Nick Owen? Have you sacked him? Brackets, at last. And the editor said to me, I think, we're going to have to say something soon because so many people are writing in about you. And I was planning to come back. So we decided shortly before I came back to come out and say what had happened. So I did an interview for our own programme recorded at home, telling people, and then I went live on BBC Breakfast the following morning, and that led to an explosion of responses from people who decided that they were going to go and get tested. And I'm sure you're the same, that the amount of people who've responded and got tested and been grateful that they got tested because they were found positive. I'm really glad I did it, but I wouldn't naturally have done it.
It's amazing that, I mean, you speaking for me as well, but it's amazing that effect, isn't it? That, little old me and little old you, what effect are we going to have, we think? But, because we've been around for a long time and, presented news especially, which has some, heaven knows why, some authority about it, actually making that announcement and the idea in your head that, yes, of course it is about me and my worry and my family, but if it means that one man who is in my situation gets tested earlier and gets treated earlier and therefore gets the all clear, that's worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And that is a message we have to keep banging out to people. For goodness sake, get on the system, get tested. I know it's not a perfect system and there are lots of reasons to be concerned about it, but, it is now, prostate cancer, the most diagnosed cancer in the country. I mean, that is a staggering thought. And I bet it wasn't even like that 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. But it's because people have come out and talked about it, it's become so high profile that people are getting tested and then therefore diagnosed with prostate cancer. Something like 12,000 a year die from it. 1 in 8 people.
I think it's the second biggest cancer killer of men.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely frightening. So, the fact that it is being talked about more and people are finding out that, if you're over 50, it's really worth trying to get tested, and especially if you've got it in the family. And I've got 3 boys, they're sort of late 30s and into their 40s. And I'm really concerned about them. They've all been tested. They're all clear at the moment, touch wood. But, I'm very anxious about that.
What was your own testing journey? Don't like the phrase, but, once you hit 50, probably just a few years ago.
Yeah.
No, but when you hit 50, do you think about it then? Like me, you'll have sat on sofas, particularly breakfast sofas, discussing prostate cancer with experts, with sufferers. And in the back of your mind will be, maybe I ought to go and get tested. I'll do that soonish or whatever, but I feel fine.
That's exactly my thought process. And so when I got to about 60, I thought I would have a PSA. So I did, and it was fine. But after a while, I did get one that was slightly concerning, and I ended up having a biopsy. This must be 15 years ago now that I had my first ever biopsy. And it came back all clear. And so fair enough. And then a little later, I got another slightly worrying raised reading on my PSA. And again, I saw a specialist this time, and another specialist, should I say, and had MRI and all that and various tests. And it seemed fine. And so that figure, which was 7.7 or something, which is quite high, but given the all clear. So I continue to be 7.7 every sort of 6 months or so. And my GP thought, well, it's consistent. You should be all right. And then amazingly, it came down. And I was absolutely, cock a hoop that it had come down. It means, I must be really A-okay. Yeah. But I happened to see a different GP within the same practice. And he said, I think you ought to see someone. I said, you're joking, it's come down. He said, well, at your age, you're over 75, and, anything over 5 on a PSA, slightly iffy, And I said, no, surely not. In the end, he persuaded me against my better judgment to go and see a specialist who himself wasn't too worried, but he said, I tell you what, let's do an MRI. Had the MRI, and there was something there. And one thing led to another, and I had a biopsy, and suddenly, wow, everywhere, aggressive, do something now.
Now, another name that launched breakfast television in the UK, Selena Scott. Selena's career is packed with moments that changed the face of broadcasting. She was just in her early 20s when she first joined ITN and joined News at 10. And then in 1981 covered the marriage of the then Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer. Well, I asked Selena about that and the comparisons that were made at the time in the press between her and Lady Di.
She had a sense of humour. She said to me once, everyone compares me to you and say we look alike. I said, yeah, I know, but I came first. I was the one that came first.
Did you really say that?
And so
good for you.
I mean, she laughed because I don't know. We had a similar build, and of course the fashion of the day was for hair and shoulder pads and all of that in the 80s. It was so yes, she was. She came to ITN to look round ITN. Michael Shea, he was a Scottish press officer for the Palace, decided that she needed to have some idea of what was happening behind the scenes rather than just being forever in the news. So he brought her when she was a few months pregnant with William to ITN, and she was introduced to everyone, and she was very young. And I remember we got into the lift. She and I got into the lift to go up to the 5th floor, and all the men, there's David Nicholas and Alistair Burnett, who had been escorting her around, were left outside, and she closed the door. And the first thing she said to me was, "Tell me who your boyfriend is. Which one of them is your boyfriend?" I said, "Well, you must be joking." I said, "Have you seen them?" By the time I got to the 5th floor, she was going to tell me what Anwar Sadat had said to her in the recent state visit she'd made to Egypt. But the doors opened just as she was about to tell me, and there they all were again. They'd run up the stairs to meet the lift.
Out of breath.
So, yes, so that was the end of that conversation. But she was look at her. I mean, she had such a baptism, didn't she, of fire coming into the royal family, and everything that was going on. The attention that she had was colossal.
I think still unprecedented in the scale of it, wasn't it, over those, brief time. She was married in 81 and lost to us in 1997. It's only 16 years.
Yes, do you know, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Did you stay in touch with her? Did she, particularly when it came to press intrusion, did she ever compare notes with you or ask you for advice?
Yeah, we did. We did whenever, we met. She was very natural. There was no ceremony at all. She was struggling. And it was, Michael Shea was the one that was trying to be the go-between. I think, he asked me if I would mentor her, but I felt that, I just felt I was doing too much. I was immersed in it. And she had her own, life, which she was immersed in that. And it was, the crossover would have been extremely difficult. You know what it's like. If you've got to talk to someone, you've got to do an interview with someone, you can't be friends. You can't be friends like that with them. And so I kept my distance to a degree. And of course, she had a life which absorbed her, and she went in that direction. But of course, everything was very intertwined. The palace and the news and the photographers. It was enmeshed, really. So it was just a difficult time all round.
But I also guess, as an impartial journalist, to your bones, you couldn't take sides because then, as now in different ways, we talk about the palace, but there are several royal palaces and they have different press operations, different agendas. And certainly when it came to Charles and Diana, we subsequently found out there was a lot of briefing one side against the other.
Yes.
You couldn't take sides, could you? Because you also had to have a relationship with the then Prince of Wales.
That's right. No, you couldn't. And I'm surprised really that in a way I kind of managed it, but I didn't I didn't try to, take sides. I didn't. I was asked to do interviews, and I did my interviews, and that was it really.
How often have you interviewed Charles?
I interviewed him for CBS. I put in a request to interview him, and he ended up in the Amazon, I remember, with a group of tribesmen, and he was talking about, of course, at those days, he was very...
Probably never happier. I mean,
yes.
To be in the Amazon with some tribespeople.
But there's no one there. There was no press there. There was no... so it made the effort to get into the Amazon. No one turned up. So he remembered that I'd said, CBS would like to do something with you. And I was called, and I did the interview. I went and did the interview with him, and he was sparky about the environment. I remember it was all, and that went out coast to coast in America. So that was the first one. Then it was the one on Bernary. He came to Bernary with me. That's the little island off the west coast of Scotland. Yes. And then there was another one. What was the other one? I did 2 for CBS, that was it, and I did 1 for ITV.
And what was your judgment, if you made one, of the character of the now king?
He was very natural. He was, when you saw him with the Islanders, it showed a completely different side to him. You hear a lot about how spoiled he is and how the toothpaste is put on his toothbrush by whoever. But he lived with a couple of crofters, Gloria and Splash McKillop, on the island of Bernary, and he was upstairs in the attic, and he ate with them. And I remember sitting down for dinner with him and Splash and Gloria, and we had mutton and potatoes, and I'm not a big fan of meat. And I'd kind of struggled, and we got to the end of the meal, and he'd finished, and he said, "Are you going to leave that?" And I said, "Yes, I can't eat any more." So he said, "I'll have it." So he got and he spurt with his fork and lifted the potato and put it straight in his mouth, and then grabbed the mutton and kind of put it on his plate. And I thought, well, I wasn't brought up with bad manners like that. And here is, the Prince of Wales behaving, like this. So that was quite an eye-opener. But he was very natural with everyone, very moved by, I remember the throat music, the voice of singers in the church on a Sunday, and that was very moving too.
Julia Somerville is another legend who is still all over our screens right now, holding wrong uns to account on Rip Off Britain. But she started her long television career reporting on the industrial strife of the 1980s before moving behind the desk, firstly for the BBC, then on News at 10 after being poached by ITN. Now, she told me about that move from the BBC to commercial television and how it was a response by ITN to the BBC's poaching of Martin Lewis, the newsreader, not the money-saving expert, from them.
The reason I went was that I thought that the format of the lunchtime news involved interviewing and things like that, which I really wanted to do, because the problem with the way things were at the BBC for newscasters was you were completely rigid. You just had to do the news. That was it. There were no other programmes that they got you involved with or anything like that. And I thought, at ITN there'd be a bit more variety. So, and I also felt, to be honest with you, it would fit more easily with having kids and all that.
But there was the old kind of almost showbiz poaching going on there, wasn't there? Didn't the the BBC take someone from ITN and they thought, right, we'll retaliate.
I'll tell you what happened. Peter Sissons.
That's it.
No. Martin Lewis. Sorry.
Oh yes.
Martin Lewis went from ITN, and I went to BBC,
right.
And one of the papers headlined this as the tit-for-tat exchange.
The end of the Alistair Burnett, you've mentioned Alistair, his era, he dominated News at 10 from its foundation right up to the early 90s. He left News at 10 in 1991, and I think left ITN as well. Trevor McDonald was promoted, and they went, this was seismic at the time, single anchor.
Yes.
It was just going to be Trevor, not the double heading that people had remembered before. But you moved to News at 10 and I think did the bits that Trevor didn't do, and had your own segment within the new look News at 10.
Well, that was because I'd had a brain tumour and had an operation, and I'd been out of, I hadn't been working for, I don't know, whatever it was, 3 or 4 months or something like that. Anyway, came back with a newly shaved head and was offered this segment that I did, and I can't remember what it was called. But
Focus on Britain. I remember it. Yeah.
Oh, well, you've got a better memory than me. Thank you.
You had to stand up. It was revolutionary. You were standing up in front of a big screen and doing a story of, interest, national interest, rather than importance.
Well, if you say so. If you find it interesting, I'm really glad, because I don't remember anything about it, really.
I was a toady then. I was trying to get on.
And so you did.
But Trevor was wonderful to work with, wasn't he? Trevor's been in, and I mean, it must have just been wonderful, being a colleague.
And actually, I have to say a small word about Sandy Gall, because Sandy Gall was the other stalwart of News at 10 alongside Alistair Burnett. And he was incredibly dapper. Do you remember? Mm. He used to wear these wonderful ties and a matching kerchief, always the thing. And the weird thing was that very often, more often than not, I would find that I had chosen a jacket in the same colour as his tie and kerchief to wear. Wasn't that weird?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of...
This may seem trivial to you, but believe me.
It matters to the audience. So how many screen husbands do I have to add? How many do I have to add here? Because you've got all these News at 10 co-presenters. So I've got Sandy, Alistair.
Look, and you've left out...
Trevor.
Yeah, but you haven't dealt with all the people at the BBC, like Andrew Harvey. Philip Hayton... anyway, I've tried. Right, okay, I think there's about 25.
Right, so I was going to say we're going to get into the dozens here, so maybe I won't write them all down. Well, I became one of them. Was lucky enough to become one of them quite early on. They paired you and I up on the lunchtime news, which, as you say, was a huge amount of fun to do because it was kind of earlier in the day. They didn't throw a huge amount of production resources at it, and the stories were ill-formed, and there was a lot of chatting to do and interviewing to do because they again hadn't filmed many reports like they did then have for News at 10 later on in the evening. I think that was around about 1994 or something like that. Anyway, we don't need the dates to be precise. All you've got to say, Julie, is what fun that was.
Yes. What fun that was, Dan.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, let's move on. Julia Somerville there on a long and continuing career in broadcasting. Well, my thanks to all of my guests, and I can't wait to bring you many, many more legends in 2026. In the meantime, you can watch or listen to all the interviews wherever you get your podcasts.